Hello and God bless. This is the Reverend J.O. Smith with Not the Final Word Bible Studies. We're picking up on our study of Romans, no respecter of persons. We're starting in chapter 3. Not certain how many parts it's going to take, but let's see what we can do with the time we have allotted. So, starting in chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. What advantage hath the Jew, or what profit is there of circumcision? Much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles of God. For what if some did not believe? Shall their unbelief make the faith of God without effect? God forbid. Yea, let God be true, but every man a liar, as it is written, that thou mightest be justified in thy saying, and mightest overcome when thou art judged. Verses 1 through 4, my translation. What accordingly is the superabundance of the Jews, or what is the benefit of circumcision? It is much, down in every way, because indeed, firstly, it is that they were credited with the utterance of God. For that reason, why did some not have faith? The unbelief of them shall not render entirely idle the faith of God, shall it? God never let it come to pass. Yea, let God be true, and all men liars, exactly as it has been written, and the manner that you may be justified within the words of you, and it shall subdue you within you being judged. So, what is it that made the Jews seem to be what they claimed? What benefit was there in being a Jew? Well, they, above all others, were chosen to hear and live by God's holy standards and all God's ways. Oracles was defined by Dr. Strong as follows. Logion. It is the neutral form of Strong's Greek definition numbered 3052, an utterance of God, or oracle. These laws were literally from the mouth of God to the ears of Moses. First, literally written by the finger of God, and then by Moses' chisel, to all mankind. We can know that the law was exactly what God stated, and thus was the way to him, that is, to God. However, like our own Constitution, a law is only as good as the people who obey it and how closely they obey. In other words, God's holy standard is only as clear as he who reflects it, or how well he reflects it. This was the point Paul was making. If some did not have faith in that law, does that make the law and the holiness thereof of no effect, despite the lack of obedience towards them? Paul answers in the straightest way he can. In the Greek, it is literally ne genoi, me, excuse me. Yeah, it is me, not ne. ne, it's me. Me genoito, meaning or literally translated, never let it come to pass. Now, the word God is conspicuously absent from the Greek text here, yet it is not out of place because it is essentially an oath prayed to God. Thus, God forbid, is not out of place. Unlike the Constitution of the United States, which is only effective when it is followed and obeyed, because men wrote it, though God guided, the holiness of God is beyond man's reach to try to change its standards or to make it of no effect. In order to have the people understand why Paul wants God to be true and all men liars, he quotes from Psalm 51. In verses 1 through 4 we read, "To the chief musician, a psalm of David, when Nathan the prophet came unto him after he had gone into Bathsheba, have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, according to the multitude of thy tender mercies, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from mine iniquity, and cleanse me from mine sin. For I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against thee only, have I sinned, and done this evil in thy sight, that thou mightest be justified when thou speakest, and be clear when thou judgest." That was David's prayer of mourning, and prayer for the forgiveness of his sins after his adultery with Bathsheba and murder of Uriah. He acknowledges his sin and the fact that he is a sinner, that he habitually practices sin. David's sin showed exactly how righteous God is. It is not the profession of God's law, nor is it practicing the law that made it or the practitioners righteous. Furthermore, we see Paul uses a word that he will elaborate on in the next chapter: faith. The failure to practice the law did not render idle the faith of God. We start to see the first importance of faith in the whole formula. It is significant because when this faith is mentioned, there is no mention of race or nationality. This becomes key later and key to the main theme. Paul does elaborate some on this in the next verse, but he does so in order to demonstrate the point about sin and the sinner that he has been making about God is no respecter of persons. Verses 5 through 8. But if our unrighteousness commend the righteousness of God, what shall we say? Is God unrighteous, who taketh vengeance? I speak as a man. God forbid. For then how shall God judge the world? For if the truth of God had more abounded through my lie unto his glory, why yet am I also judged a sinner? And not rather, as we be slanderously reported, and as some affirm that we say, let us do evil that good may come, whose damnation is just. Verses 5 through 8, my translation. Yet if the injustice of us introduces the justice of God, what shall we speak? Is God unjust in superinducing violent punishment? I say this in the manner of a man. God never let it come to pass. In what way would God judge thereupon the world system? Because if the truth of God was in excess to my lie, to the glory of him, why yet am I also judged in the manner of a sinner, and not rather, just as we are blasphemed, and just as some make known to us that we say, let us do evil, that virtue may come. Of whom is judgment within the right? Before Paul drives home the point, he wants to remove a myth. He wants to make them understand that that the commission of sin is not the path of choice in God, introducing his righteous judgments. Some ask, how can God judge the sinner if his sin demonstrate God's righteousness and his righteous judgment? Some even accused Paul and the church of encouraging evil so that justice and virtue may come. In other words, some would argue that evil and good both have a place to exist, as well as a right to exist. In other words, if evil ceased to exist, then good would have no purpose or reason to be. Well, that assumes that some are inherently good and some are inherently evil. Paul then asks a rhetorical question. Whose judgment is right if all that I have stated was true? Furthermore, that mentality could lead some to ask, how then can God be just in judging? In the next verses, Paul deals with it quite concisely. Verses 9 through 20. We got a big chunk to go through, so hang tight. What then? Are we better than they? No, in no wise. For we have before proved, both Jews and Gentiles, that they are all under sin, as it is written. There is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understandeth. There is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way. They are altogether become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Their throat is an open sepulchre. With their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now we know that what things soever the law saith, it saith to them who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. Now verses 9 through 20, my personal translation. What then? Do we hold ourselves before others? No, not at all. For this reason, we have already previously charged that both Jews and Greeks, to all be under sin, exactly as it has been written, that there is none justified. No, not one. None is able to put it together mentally. None is searching for God. All have deviated at the same time and been rendered useless. None is doing moral excellence. There is not even one. The throats of them are an open grave. With the tongues of them they have been guileful. The venom of asps is under the lips of them, of whom the mouths are replete with imprecations and acridity. The feet of them are swift to spill forth blood. Complete ruin and wickedness are in the paths of them, and the paths of peace they understood not. There is no fear of God before the eyes of them. Now we know within the hearts of us that what the law says, it lays forth to they within the law, that all mouths would be blocked up, and all the world system would be under judgment of God, that all flesh would not be justified before the eyes of him, because through the law is the complete knowledge of sin. The first thing I shall address is from where Paul quotes. Well, Paul quotes several spots in the Old Testament scripture, of which I shall leave you, dear viewer, to ferret out. Now, this is where I would reiterate a position of my studies, as I said before, as I said in the introduction video to the whole series. I only scratch the surface. I encourage you to seek ever deeper into the Bible than I have. In other words, when Paul states, there is none good, no, not one, he has plenty of biblical reference points from which to quote. Even back in Genesis 6:5, God made it plain. And God saw the wickedness of man that was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. He connects chapters 1 and 2 here by saying that he has already demonstrated the inherent evil of man. In other words, it is as if it is stated, if you did not get all that, get this. Now, Paul knew well that he and his fellow Hebrews was under the greater condemnation because God entrusted them with such oracles. However, if they were just as evil as the Gentiles by nature, even before the existence of the law as the Gentile state, then their punishment would be deserved, as seen by the rest of the world. Furthermore, because they had a law that established a holy standard that God stated was the path to him, and could not keep it, as such that all would thus be judged by it instead of getting to God, then how much worse was it for the Gentile? Just because the Gentiles were ignorant of the law, it did not free them of sin's penalty, just as much as their ignorant obedience to the righteousness contained within the law did not justify them anymore. Well, therefore, Paul is saying, just a thought to ponder there. I'm just collecting my thoughts right now, because I want to see if I want to take this another way. Lord, is this what you want? Nah, let's just keep rolling. It did not justify them any more than the practitioners of the law did. Therefore, Paul is saying that God aims them at something greater, and the brief mention of faith earlier would be the key. Moreover, if the reader of this letter was not getting it, he shall sum up his point in the next verses. Verses 21 through 26. But now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God, which is by faith of Jesus, unto all and upon all them that believe. For there is no difference, for all have sinned, and come short of the glory of God, being justified freely by his grace, through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God has set forth to be a propitiation through faith in his blood, to declare his righteousness for the remission of sins that are past, through the forbearance of God, to declare, I say at this time, his righteousness, that he might be just, and the justifier of him which believeth in Jesus. Verses 21 through 26, my translation. However, now the justice of God apart from the law has been shown forth, being witnessed under the law and prophets, and moreover, the justice of God through faith in Jesus Christ unto all and upon all they who have faith, because there is no variance, because all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, being gratuitously justified by the grace of him through the salvation within Christ Jesus, who God exhibited as a sacrificial item through faith within the blood of him unto an indication of the justice of him through the remission of sins that came to be aforetimes within the self-restraint of God before the indication of the justice of him within the time that now here unto he being just and the justifier of he of the faith in Jesus. Excuse me. Now Paul summates what he has said by saying that the law of Moses, the law of God, makes it well known that God's righteousness is needed to attain him and heaven, and has been displayed apart from the law. What it seems that Paul is observing here is a time before the law, in that God has always been righteous and just, and was shown by the law and the prophets, was attainable to some extent before the law ever existed. However, Paul now states that the justification of God to his children is now also shown through faith in Jesus. Excuse me once again, getting over a little bit of a cold. Thus, no matter what era we refer to, the righteousness of God has always been attainable, either by the seeking of his righteous ways and justification before the law existed, through his law, and now through faith in Jesus. Paul is demonstrating something vital about the faith here. Though it is not said here, faith in the previous eras was the bottom line. Faith in him by the conscience, either through that alone or combined with human government, or both backed up by his promises, or now faith in Jesus. It becomes important when one remembers that no matter who one is or what time in which one lived, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Yes, God's righteousness was and is attainable to a certain extent. One can be hungry to gain the righteousness and justification of God. However, outside of Christ, one still falls short. However, now, Paul is beginning to connect Jesus into the equation. Before, one had to earn God's favor, so to speak, through one's works, though through faith in God that he would honor the works. That was needed for it to mean anything. The primary way that God dictated mankind could be redeemed was instituting the sacrifice, the innocent dying for the guilty. God instituted this the day Adam and Eve fell. When God slew animals to make clothes for the first couple, it was the first time anything ever died. Since their nudity symbolized how open and exposed their sins were, God made clothes for them to cover the reminder. Thus, the precedent was set that the innocent was to be slain to cover up the sins of the guilty. The shedding of blood thus became important because in the blood is life. Nothing outside of the most simple of creatures can live without blood. Jesus became the propitiation. Dr. Strong defines propitiation as follows. Helasterion. It is a neuter of a derivative of Strong Greek definition number 2433. An expiatory place or thing, that is, concretely, an atoning victim, or specifically, the lid of the ark in the temple. So either mercy seat or propitiation are the way this word has been translated into the King James. So Jesus was the sacrifice, the atoning victim. He had committed no sin during his life. In Hebrews 4:15 we read, "For we have not an high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin." Furthermore, by becoming the atoning victim and becoming the path of God's mercy, he became the mercy seat. Faith has been a factor with God for some time, for faith in him, for all that we have or need, is the one true way to get to him. It was that way before the law, during the law, and even now, during this time of grace. Of course, God has to be the one to respond to this faith. Therefore, any boasting of our works for him we make is irrelevant, because no matter how many we do, God must respond to our faith for our works to mean anything. By this, we have a unifying factor that brings the circumcision and the uncircumcision, the Jews and the Gentiles, together. However, Paul declares that the law is not nullified, but is established, that is made more firm and stood up strong. The reason why this is, Paul shall explain. However, he is going to insert a parenthetical section on faith and upon whom we have faith before he deals with the proper place of the law. One thing of note here that seems to sum up the whole chapter is how Paul mentions just to whom God is God. Verses 27 through 31. Where is boasting then? It is excluded. By what law? Of works? Nay, but by the law of faith. Therefore, we conclude that a man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law. Is he a God of the Jews only? Is he not also of the Gentiles? Yes, of the Gentiles also, seeing that it is one God, which shall justify the circumcision by faith, and the uncircumcision through faith. Do we make void the law through faith? God forbid. Yea, we establish the law. Verses 27 through 31, my translation. Where is boasting then? It is shut out. By what law? Of works? Nay, but by the law of faith. Accordingly, we conclude that man is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. Is he a God of the Jews only? Is he not God of the Gentiles also? Yes, of the Gentiles also. Yea, he is the God he is of the Gentiles also, since indeed it is one God who shall justify the circumcision by faith and the uncircumcision through faith. Accordingly, do we render the law idle? God never let it come to pass. Contrariwise, we stand up the law. God is the God of all creation, including all mankind. Just because God selected a people through which the Messiah, the Christ, could come, did not mean that God forsook the rest of mankind. In fact, during the time of the law, the Jews were supposed to spread the law in the same way the Christian is supposed to spread the gospel. God even called them gods, small g, please note, not in the sense of deity, but as judges and magistrates, acting in proxy for God here on earth. The 82nd Psalm reads, a psalm of Asaph. God standeth in the congregation of the mighty. He judgeth among the gods. How long will ye judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? Selah. Defend the poor and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. Deliver the poor and the needy. Rid them out of the hand of the wicked. They know not, neither will they understand. They walk on in darkness. They all the foundations of the earth are out of course. I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. But ye shall die like men, and fall like one of the princes. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for thou shalt inherit all nations. They were his angels on earth, in type for the angels in heaven. Furthermore, once one wished to adhere to the law, and once he was circumcised, he was to be absorbed and assimilated into the Jewish culture. No longer was he to be considered a Gentile. It was supposed to be as if he had never was a Gentile, no respecter of persons, before, during, or after the law. Sadly, this did not happen. They acted as if the Gentiles were too filthy and even subhuman, even to deserve the law. If one did become a proselyte and even was circumcised, he was never honestly treated as a Jew. Though he adhered to the law, the altar was kept from him. There was a court where he was permitted, but no further. Archaeologists have even uncovered a plaque outside a gate which must have led to the altar, for it reads, any Gentile found beyond this gate will have only himself to blame for his subsequent death, or something to that effect. Despite it all, God wanted to provide a more excellent way for all mankind. I indeed speculate that God knew how mankind would react when a portion became his chosen. It all played right into his plan. It would be the way that all could come to God equally. Well, that was chapter 3, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the study. I hope you got something out of it. So I am the Reverend J.O. Smith. I say God bless, and remember, I am not the final word.